Welcome to our weekly episode of Economics Explained. This week's topic is going to be monopolies. And I'm not talking about the board game, I'm talking about a firm that has all of the control over a market and thus can do almost whatever it wants. Whenever most of us think of a monopoly, most of us think of these huge companies that completely dominate the industry, like Andrew Carnegie in the steel industry or Rockefeller in the oil industry. In most cases, these lead to negative effects on the consumers, like higher prices and lower quality. However, not every monopoly is evil or trying to steal all of our money. Some of them, called natural monopolies, actually benefit society. This type of monopoly is much more unique in the sense that it succeeds where a normal competitive market would fail. A few examples of natural monopolies include utility distribution, like electricity, gas, and water. Due to their astronomically large fixed and startup costs, these markets have substantial barriers to entry. The reason these costs are so huge is the nature of the market and the infrastructure needed to provide for so many people. For example, the entire US electric grid supplies roughly 159 million users each year. The only way that they can reach so many people is through massive webs of power lines. The US alone has roughly 7 million miles of distribution lines. To put that into perspective, that is enough power lines to wrap around the Earth roughly 6,385 times. And at a rough price of $285,000 per mile, that adds up to a lot of money. Because of these humongous fixed costs, electric utilities face a massive potential to operate at economies of scale. Economies of scale is the cost advantages that firms obtain due to their scale of operation, with cost per unit of output decreasing with increasing scale. This is partly due to the fixed costs driving up the total costs. In order to minimize the average costs, the firms will have to operate at a massive quantity. This is shown here by this downward sloping long-run average total cost curve. And we can see the minimum efficient scale point, which is where the economies of scale are maximized. Due to this market having such high fixed costs, there is enormous potential to operate at economies of scale. Because the firms can operate at economies of scale, it makes sense for a singular utility firm to supply the entire market. In fact, competition itself is undesirable in the utility market. Competition would result in a wasteful duplication of production. This is because the first firm in the market, Ameren, for example, has already built up the infrastructure and has the economies of scale advantage. Thus, if any firm were to join after Ameren, they aren't going to have the same economies of scale advantage and would be priced out of the market. This act of closing the market to new firms is a barrier of entry to the utility market, which prevents others from joining the market to compete with companies like Ameren. When we think about this in real life scenarios, would it make sense to have 3 different sets of power lines running to the same place? No, of course not. This is why it makes sense for only one firm to supply the utility market. In the case of Southern Illinois, Ameren is that sole provider. However, since Ameren is a profit maximizer, they want to provide where the marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Let's draw that in and label it P1 and Q1. Then, as you can see, we drew in where profit would be in this type of situation, which is where the firms want to produce at. However, where these firms wish to produce at to maximize their profits is not good enough in the eyes of government regulators. The regulators see these high prices and low quantities. They do not agree with providing these necessities to so few people and at such a high price. One reason that regulators do this is because of the unique case of utilities and how they are necessary in everyday life. The regulators want everybody to have access to cheap power, and so in order to fix this problem, they regulate the utility company towards allocative efficiency. Allocative efficiency represents an ideal distribution of goods and services to consumers in an economy. Let's draw this in now. As you can see, there is a huge increase in quantities supplied and decrease of price. In the case of Ameren, the supply costs are simply passed on to the customer without markup or profit. In fact, it is illegal for Ameren to make a profit off of your usage of electricity. However, when the regulators do this, the utilities experience huge subnormal profit because average revenue is well below average cost. As a result of this huge loss the firms are facing, they ask for a subsidy from the regulator. A subsidy is a sum of money granted by the government to assist an industry in keeping the price of a service low. Usually, the subsidy tends to be equal to the loss incurred due to the regulation. In the case of Ameren, each year they file with the government to get back what they invested and losses they incurred due to regulations. After these government regulations force the natural monopolist to produce closer to the economies of scale, we see an increase in allocative and productive efficiency, which would not be possible in a competitive market. You might be wondering, do these utilities make any money? The answer is yes. Utilities make a profit from their investments in the assets, like power lines, that are used to provide the service and do not earn profits on the products they sell, like power. Basically, the more infrastructure that a utility builds, the higher the profits it can generate. For example, Ameren posted revenues of $1.63 billion for the quarter ending in September 2020. This has helped drive Ameren's dividends for the past 5 years, which averaged $1.81 per year per share. This dividend yield has helped to boost the price of Ameren stock from just under $44 per share in November 2015 to November 2020 price of nearly $78 per share. If somebody purchased 1,000 shares in 2015, they could sell those shares for a profit of $34,000, not including all the quarterly dividends, which averaged $1.81 per year per share, which would have been another $1,810. The return on the initial investment of $44,000 was 81.4%, excluding any commission fees. Looks like we all should have invested back in 2015. Now you might be thinking to yourself that these utilities seem like a great, reliable investment. However, before you decide if they are the right investment for you, let me show you some recent trends in this market. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, a forecasted decrease of U.S. energy consumption in 2020 of roughly 4% is very likely. This has a few implications. Firstly, we need to understand how we are decreasing energy usage when our need only continues to grow. This is because the new technologies and pushes for more effective systems, like the U.S. Energy Star program. Since its creation in 1992, Energy Star, which is a government backed symbol for energy efficiency, has provided reliable and unbiased information that consumers and businesses rely on to make well informed decisions. In fact, Energy Star has helped American families and businesses save more than 4 trillion kilowatt hours of electricity and achieve over 3.5 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas reductions. Now, I don't know about you, but that is an awful lot of energy that we are saving simply by making smarter decisions on which products to buy. Along with this growing public concern and mindfulness of energy consumption, lots of new exciting technologies have come about. One example of such technologies would be the new innovations of LED light bulbs, which use 75% less energy than incandescent lighting. Fun fact: according to IMS research, there are about 5.6 billion light bulbs in the US. Now imagine if every one of those light bulbs used 75% less energy, we would save so much energy. Another big trend in the energy market is huge technological advances in solar and wind production. These advances can be seen in this graph. You can see the trends in renewables having resulted in a steady reduction in coal power from 45% to just under 25% over the past 10 years. One cause of this decline is a multitude of environmental concerns. These include greenhouse gas emissions from energy production, waste concerns, and usage of non renewable resources. Also, we can see that natural gas production seems to be leveling off. These sources of energy are being affected mainly due to the introductions of new means of production, solar and wind. As you can see, renewables are expected to make up roughly 15% of all U.S. energy production. Here's another fun fact for you. The U.S. Energy Information Administration forecasts that planned additions to wind and solar generating capacity in 2020 will cause the U.S. electric power sector to add 23 gigawatts of new wind capacity in 2020 and 12.8 gigawatts of solar in 2020. Along with this new wave of revolutionary technological advances comes a lot of hurdles that these huge utility companies will have to face. One such hurdle is the projected growth in the electric vehicle fleet. This will be a huge new demand in the grid's infrastructure. According to BNEF, by 2040, over half of all passenger vehicles sold will be electric. Now, that is a lot of cars and poses a real problem that these utility companies are going to be faced with and coming up with new ways to power new electric refill stations all across the world. We believe that they, along with new tech companies, will be able to face this problem and expand the market in which they operate in. Overall, we have went a long way from the days of the steel and oil monopolies, traveling towards a more sociably and acceptable form of a monopoly. Without certain natural monopolies in our society, consumers would face higher prices due to large fixed costs. However, as we've learned, the regulators want everyone to have access to cheap and reliable power, so they regulate the firms in the market. In addition to government regulations, we are seeing a shift in public opinion on environmental effects of energy production, which is driving innovation into renewable energy sources. Also, we've learned how these firms can make a profit without charging outrageous prices and can be good, steady investment opportunities. Stay tuned, your weekly taste of economics explained, and don't forget to like and share this video.